subhanallah, there is an ayah, especially in what the news media used to call acts of God. Natural disasters, whether it's something that affects the whole country or the whole area, or in our case, some cities, 10 minutes, and in some cases just 3 minutes of a storm took out power, electricity for 1 million people. And although the death count could have been higher, it was 10 people that lost their lives due to the storm, subhanAllah. So the first act that I want to be grateful for, the first thing that I want to be grateful for is the fact that I'm alive. I wasn't in the city at the time. I actually came back to the city after the storm, and I had gone to visit my family, and I came back to my children, every single one of them safe, every single one of them fed and in good condition. And that was the hugest thing to me, just that everybody was safe. We forget sometimes when we're talking about gratefulness to be grateful for our own lives. We forget death so often, and I find that forgetting about death and neglecting to be reminded about death is one of the main ways that humanity forgets they're human. They forget that they have an end. They forget that that end can come whenever. It can come at any time. When we are pondering our own deaths, that's one level that we might not be able to get to. We might not be aware enough of ourselves to get to that point. But when we consider the deaths of others, that might be a little easier. We consider the death of somebody in our family. We consider the death of somebody that we go to school with, or someone we go to work with, somebody that we know in our community. In my city, we get janazah notifications almost every week. This person has passed away due to an illness. This person has passed away due to old age. But when a natural disaster comes, then there is an extra outside force that may take several lives, whole families, in fact. The other aspect of death that we have to consider is the method. We think that we have a life expectancy. You know, we use this word life expectancy. But what is our life expectancy? Why do we think that, in Canada we could live to the age of, 85, 75? In different ages and times, people measure their success or their level of development by the age at which most people expire. But subhanAllah, to me, this idea of having a life expectancy is a fallacy, and it is something that I think if people stop thinking my life is going to end at such and such date, it is a ridiculous idea to consider that you expect to be alive in the next second, you expect to be alive in the next minute, the next hour. To me, this idea of a life expectancy, do you expect to be alive? It doesn't take place. We should go to bed and we should count our blessings and be grateful before we go to bed each night, because we don't know, as sleep is the cousin of death, if we will wake up in the morning. And this is also why the Prophet ﷺ told us to say, Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyana ba'da ma amatana wa ilayhi nushur. We praise Allah and we thank Allah for waking us up after having taken our souls. And we realize that we will all go back to Allah. This leads to considering being grateful for being reminded. This storm is still affecting the city, is still affecting businesses and individuals. Of course, those people who lost their family members, it's going to affect them for the rest of their lives. But when we consider our own existence in the grand scheme of things, all we have is our intention and what we get to do in the time that we have left. So this first reminder in my gratefulness series, all having to do with this storm, just made me realize that we are bent towards ungratefulness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Innal insana li rabbihi lakanud. that people are bent towards not being grateful. And so we have to remind ourselves to be grateful. And this is to myself first, as I pondered and reflected on it in the time that we had away from screens and technology over the 5 days that we had no power in my house. I reflected on my children, I reflected on myself and my community, and I realized, we need to be more grateful. As a people, as a world, we need to be more grateful for what we have. And so this is my first offering, inshallah, for a gratefulness series, and it's all good from here. So if you want, inshallah, to continue to watch, I'm going to be talking about the different aspects of gratefulness that I have been reminded of after this large storm. After this big storm, one of the main things that we took for granted was the presence of light. So this is going to be more of a spiritual commentary and a connection to physical light and what we have. Subhanallah. So first I will just tell you a little story about how I intended to go to a hotel that weekend after visiting my brother and do some filming, as I'm doing now. I intended to do that the weekend of the storm. Of course, the hotel that I went to, their power was out by the time I got there, and I just decided to go right back home to my family, especially after I realized that they also had no power several hours away. So, but to prepare for going to the hotel, of course, when you're doing videos, you're thinking about lighting, and I thought to myself, I was at a department store, and I thought I should probably just get some LED lights and some batteries so that I can do this video shoot, and I can have enough lighting to have like good video shoot. And so subhanallah, so of course they just got left in the car because I didn't even bring them into the hotel. There wasn't any point. I just came right back home. But subhanallah, what was the main thing that my children needed when I got home? I arrived right at the first day of the storm in the evening, right at Maghrib time. And that was the time when they were, lighting candles and, trying to, see where they were going. We live in a house, so we had the daylight coming in from the back and the front of the house, but in the basement and in the bathrooms, when the door is closed, there's absolutely no light at all. So, alhamdulillah, I told them, you guys, I already bought all these lights. There was a set of 4 LED lights with batteries, and subhanallah, the batteries thing also just, I mean, we had no power, but we had these batteries and we had these lights, and subhanallah, because they were LED lights, they were much brighter than the candles, a little safer as well, and we were able to bring them with us and use them in the bathroom. And even for the whole 5 days, subhanallah, there was enough battery and enough power for those LED lights that we were able to use them all 5 days, especially in the evening. And that was a huge blessing. And to me, it's just an amazing demonstration of Allah's provision. I intended to use those so that I could relax at a hotel and shoot some videos, but what Allah intended for me to do with those is to bring them home to my family so that we could have light at a time when we didn't have any. Something very interesting happened in my house when the lights were off. Even though we had the LED lights, usually what happens in my house is that people go onto their devices and they do, they watch videos and they play games, until the late hours. And I have a problem with that because I'm trying to do homeschool and I'm a morning person. So what happened during the course of the week very quickly is that people started to just go to bed when it got dark. We'd stay up just until to offer our Isha Salah, and then we would just go to bed, subhanallah. And it was amazing because people were getting up in the morning. They were getting up when the sun came up. And it was such a natural and beautiful way. I just thought that was really interesting when I consider, the schedule that I was hoping for. And then, we talked about that as a family, and we thought, this is probably close to the schedule of the people before there was electricity, invented. People would use candles and these kinds of things, but of course it doesn't throw that much light and it would have just been for necessity in the dark, is the time for rest. SubhanAllah. So I find it very interesting. This is what happened with our family during the course of almost a week without power. And but then, of course, I was considering, the blessing, of course, of electricity, but more importantly of light. Because you can generate light. There's light that comes from it without electricity. Of course, you have the sunlight. I have these beautiful garden lights that I actually started using in the house as well. The LED lights started dying, some of them, and I ran out of batteries. So I told my children, go get the garden lights. I have these solar powered little garden lights that I bought earlier in the spring. And subhanAllah, so we were bringing those in, and they were brighter still. So we had a level of light that was good. The level of light was dying, and then we brought in the garden lights, and they are solar powered. So subhanAllah, like, I just think about the different levels. So we had this electricity first, light bulbs and things, and then that died because we had no power and ability to bring electricity. The power and electricity that's from the company, the hydro, and the storm tore up many hydro poles and caused other wires to be damaged with trees and things like that. So that was one level of power. No ability to bring power into our house. We couldn't power up anything. We went over to our local mosque to charge our devices and to do work and things like that. But that was one level. Okay, so we have the level of the electricity that comes in the house through the wires. That is out of our control. That is entirely out of our control. And then there was the LED lights and the batteries that I had just happened to bring. I just happened to bring them. It was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed that I would buy LED lights and a bunch of batteries, and they would be used in a different way. So then we have the lights that are for a certain purpose, but then Allah shifts that purpose, and what Allah wanted to happen with those lights is what took place, and not my own designs. And then the other level is that the whole time I had these garden lights that were lighting up the outside, which nobody really took any benefit from. They were just lighting up my garden, and which I purchased for decoration only, really. I hadn't ever actually sat outside with my lights because, in the garden they're not that bright, and it's just not my habit to sit outside my house in the nighttime. But subhanAllah, these lights were even brighter than the LED lights, and they were more beautiful. And, we had them kind of like in vases and bottles, just kind of sitting around in the house. And, by the morning though, because these were solar powered throughout the day and it was still a little bit cloudy, the amount of energy in the solar panel had died. And so by the morning, they'd need to go back outside and be recharged. And subhanAllah, so since we already know that this is going to be about spiritual light, about guidance, then we can bring some very interesting similes and ayahs into each of those kinds of light. So if we think about the electricity, we think about the power, we think about the wires that are coming into the house, and it is something that we just always had, and we didn't really properly prepare for not having it. This is very interesting. We didn't prepare properly for not having the power. We just assumed that we always had it. And so when we liken this to guidance, this is like someone who's either been Muslim for a while, like myself, or someone who's been born Muslim. And they have the guidance there, and they just, it's just there. It's part of their identity, their personal identity, but they don't work to establish it, and they don't prepare for times of weak faith to have the tools to continue to be faithful and strong in their belief. So the way of doing that is to always remember Allah. When you wish to have the guidance with you no matter what, always do what's required. Make sure that you pray, make sure that you do what you're supposed to do. All of the good things that you've been doing, just consistently do them, even if you don't feel like it. Do them and make yourself do them for the sake of Allah, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this guidance would stay with you. This is one reflection about the power, that we are ungrateful sometimes for the fact that we are Muslims, and we don't work to make sure that we stay Muslim, subhanAllah. So then we have the LED lights with the batteries, and I don't know if you think this is a stretch. To me, it's as obvious, subhanAllah. A lot of time, a lot of extra time to reflect. When we think about the LED lights and the batteries, The LED lights in the batteries remind me of when, you know, you go to a friend, and the friend is a good Muslim, and you sit and you speak with your friend or a group of friends, and you just get really, really energized with Iman, and you get involved in like a volunteer activity, and this consistent volunteer activity, you know, see, the LED lights are power saving, you know, they exude a lot of light, but they don't use much electricity. And so in a situation like that, you know, if you were just consistently doing good deeds, you do small acts of charity, you know, you want to visit people, you say good things to encourage others towards worshiping Allah, towards being excellent people, then, you know, you're like the LED light that has, you know, a battery, and you're staying with what you can do. You don't hurt yourself and go beyond what you can do and exhaust yourself, but you're just consistently doing good things. You're meeting with good people on a regular basis, and you're sharing good with others. And sometimes that goes down. Sometimes that light goes down. Even that level of light goes down. But you are able to extend that light. You're able to extend that guidance and keep the faith longer than someone who may have a ton of energy to do one thing and then get burnt out, subhanAllah. This is another reason why I'm in a hotel, to avoid burnout, to take some time for myself. And this is what I encourage my brothers and sisters to do as well. You know, get out of the box, get out of your regular routine every once in a while, experience things that you're unfamiliar with, keep offering your salah, keep remembering Allah, but, you know, get out of the regular routine. Especially for those of us who are giving dawah, it can be very stressful and very demanding, and it's important for us, and it's important for our dawah and for our state of mind in order to continue to be able to effectively help others, that we need to take a break from some time, and again, get off of the screens, get off of the social media, and really do a lot of self-reflection and self-healing, subhanAllah, with the will of Allah. So now we come to the outdoor garden lights. Now, the outdoor garden lights, where are they getting their energy from? And this sums up the whole argument. Where is the energy from? It is from the sun. And where is the sun? Who created the sun? It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we consider that Allah blessed us with this guidance, and this guidance is from Allah ultimately, it isn't from the fact that you've accepted Islam. It isn't from the fact that your parents were Muslim and they raised you as a Muslim, or they gave you a Muslim name. It isn't from the good friends that you meet from time to time that raise your iman. It isn't from the conferences or the lectures or the very amazing khutbah. It isn't from the video that you saw. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the light and the guidance is from Allah. And when we consider a life without guidance, then we consider what it is to be in darkness. So what is it like when we're in darkness? When we are in darkness, we can't imagine a time when we could see. It is hard for us to contemplate the idea that we could get out or we could have light in our lives. When we have no light, we can't see, we stumble, we fall, and we look at our situation as desperate, we feel alone. But when we have light, then we're able to see. We're able to look at things and see deeper into things. We are more careful, and it is much more difficult for us to trip and fall. We're able to see our surroundings. We can see farther and longer. So this is just a way for us to reflect upon light and reflect upon the gratefulness that we should all have, not only for electricity in our homes, but for the light and guidance from Allah. Another aspect to the gratefulness that I felt after this big storm and the power outage that followed it was the ease with which we prepare food, subhanAllah. When we consider having no power in our homes, then we consider the first thing, okay, how am I going to prepare food? How will I cook food? I found that in our family, we were eating more fruits and less unhealthy foods, because the fruits are just available right there. So all the fruits were eaten and everybody was satisfied. But subhanAllah, it was the whole day we were approaching dinner, and we would approach dinner in the entire day because we had a charcoal barbecue, and that was the only way that we could cook. SubhanAllah, it was very difficult because we'd have to plan well ahead of things that everybody felt like eating. And that was in a household with my children, sometimes, only people want to eat about half the time of the different things. So it would be very difficult. We'd pretty much be cooking the same things all week. So, hot dogs and hamburgers, chicken and these kind of things. So when we'd approach, each other in the morning, we'd say, okay, what are we gonna cook for supper? We didn't care about the breakfast and the lunch because we thought we'll just eat whatever, whatever hasn't gone bad yet, or, just sandwiches or those kinds of things. But in the evening, so subhanAllah, one of the things that I was ungrateful for was the fact that I could decide maybe an hour or two before supper what to have and how to cook it. But, we contemplated, okay, well, what can we cook on a charcoal barbecue? What can we cook outside? How can we cook it outside? What's the easiest way for us to prepare a meal that everybody will eat? And how to cook it as well. I didn't grow up using a barbecue, so we took turns trying to cook, and sometimes things would get burnt and we'd kind of have to eat it anyway because we didn't have anything else. And subhanAllah, so it was a big challenge. So one of the main things that I was grateful for when the power came back on was just being able to decide, okay, like today when I go home, I'll be able to say to my children, okay, what are we having for dinner? And, it'll just be a couple of hours before we eat. The other thing about food that I'm really grateful for, and maybe other people are considering this, and the way we shop in my house is that we basically shop for the day or the next 2 days. And unless, someone gives us food to put in the freezer, we don't usually have the habit of stockpiling things in the freezer. We do have a freezer, we have a couple of freezers, but we don't at this point use them for much. And so when the food went bad, as I'm sure it did all across the affected area, except for those lucky people who had generators, they were, plugging their freezers in and things like that. And in the countryside, it makes a lot more sense to stockpile these things and put things in the freezer because it's so costly to constantly go drive to a store or something. But in the city, I found it kind of excessive, and this way, we planned each day as it came. So when things started to go bad in the fridge and in the freezer, we had to quickly eat the ice cream, which wasn't all bad for my children and myself. But also the amount of food that we had to throw away was so little compared to what other people had to do. Of course, just minimal kind of leftovers, really. And I was so grateful for that as well, because I just imagined the different restaurants and some people who have like large freezers full of food, and subhanAllah, having to throw all of that out. It's such a huge waste. And then of course, when the power came back on, to replenish those groceries and to stockpile more, or to fill up, the freezers and the fridges with food, was a huge blessing for just the manner in which we shop. So these two issues regarding food, it was very interesting that we spent like the whole day planning about eating and how to eat and how to keep going. And it reminded me of how people live in other countries where they're very poor, where war has ravaged them, and they may live in a house that did have electricity, but in places like Palestine and in Yemen, all across the world where there's conflicts happening, when there's wars and attacks happening, and it's denying people these basic things like electricity in the house and running water that we really do take for granted. So one of the other things that is on many people's minds about after this storm is the trees that have been lost. SubhanAllah, the tree that's just directly in front of my home is already dying. It's putting out new small trees at its base, and some of the branches have not put leaves, and it was already dying. And that was one of the first things I thought about when I was returning back to the city. Like, what is that tree going to look like? Is the tree going to fall? Is it going to be blown onto somebody or somebody's car or somebody's house? the way the tree is situated, it's so close to my house that all of the branches face towards the front yard and people's cars. So my assumption is that if that tree goes, it's going to fall towards cars. But it is quite a tall tree, and so it may even damage somebody's home or hurt somebody. When I went home and I found the tree still standing, I was relieved because I was concerned about it. And then when I went up to the second story and I looked out the window, I realized that there is a huge crack in the center of the tree. And I asked my children about that, and my daughter said, yeah, I heard a large crack. When the storm was happening, there was a large crack from this tree. So subhanAllah, that tree is it's a fragile tree, and there are already some branches that have broken that have not entirely fallen off. And I've tried to get through to the city to come and take the tree down. But so many of the other big, extremely big, healthy trees were the ones to fall because they had so much wind resistance. The wind just came and just ripped them up. And subhanAllah, if you can see a huge tree with the roots sticking up, like it's not as though the trees broke and the roots were strong enough to keep the tree in the ground. The roots are up as well. There are multiple trees, although they've been doing a lot of cleanup, mashallah, in the city. There are multiple trees where the roots are entirely exposed and the tree is on its side, and there's a hole in the ground. Multiple times, even just in my own neighborhood, I've seen that. And subhanAllah, it gives you another expectation again about life expectancy, about death, really. I love trees. There was this one tree that was close to our home. It was kind of between my house and the mosque. And when I would pass by that tree, just the week before, I commented to my daughter, I said, I just love this tree. It's so big, and you can tell it's been there for a really long time. A lot of beautiful branches and leaves hanging, and subhanAllah, that was one of the trees that got ripped up from the root. And I love that tree because I could see how healthy it was, and it was strong, and it had lived there for a long time. It wasn't near anybody's house, alhamdulillah, so when it fell basically into the parking lot, and nobody's car was in there at the time. So there wasn't any damage to anybody or anything aside for the tree. But it just makes you feel so sad to see so many of these beautiful trees just blown over. And the wind just whipped through so quickly and so with such speed that it just lifted these trees out of the air. When my son was going to work, he noticed that there was a tree hanging off of electric wire. So he said, like, a tree not only just got ripped up from the ground, but it got lifted into the air and is hanging off of a wire. Subhanallah. Now, for those of you who are seeing this video and you've lived through tornadoes and you've lived through hurricanes and these kind of things, like, it's not, you're like, oh, well, yeah, okay, we've seen this before. But for me, it's very shocking, subhanAllah, to see these huge trees, because in my mind, I'm thinking, in a windstorm, the dead trees are the ones to go because they're barely hanging on anyway. Or that the trees that are diseased and they're missing leaves, these are the ones that are going to go because they're missing leaves, and they're, apparently in my own mind, because I misunderstand Allah's qadr, and because I misunderstand life expectancy, and I misunderstand who and what is closer to destruction and who is not. And this is why I did this series, so that we can think about our own perceptions of our life expectancy, our resilience. We think to ourselves, could I die? And immediately the shaitan says, no. You're healthy, you're strong, you live in a safe place, you're inside your home, your door is locked, you have other people in the house to keep you safe, all this kind of stuff. These ideas come through the mind, but they're not beneficial ideas. If you suffer from, anxiety, or you suffer from, from a lot of stress and worry, these can be comforting, but we always do have to consider that Allah is the source of all things, and Allah will take our souls, and Allah does not need anything, any device, any storm, any medical condition, any person to take our souls. And with that being said, we have to consider, are we living in a way that if Allah does just pluck us out of the earth, like He's plucked all these trees out, and leaves our roots to bear, will we have left a legacy and lived a life that we would be proud of? You know, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the 2nd chapter, it says, begin with the end in mind. Now, because my perception of the book was about business and was about, management and these kinds of things, when I saw the chapter title, I thought he was talking about the end goal of whatever project you're working on, like a work project. He's talking about death. He's talking about when you are at your grave. The whole first part of the chapter is a mental exercise of your janazah. When you are in the ground and you are laying there hearing the voices of the people around the grave, what are they saying about you? What are people talking about you? What have you left? And even if you don't have anybody talking about you, what have you left in this life that was worth the struggle when you consider your own death? And it's for myself first, of course, always for us to be contemplating our own deaths and be aware, not afraid so much, but be aware that Allah could take our soul at any time, and we must try to be on the best of our behavior, make amends with people as much as we can, and avoid harming people and avoid hurting others, so that in that time when we are hearing the people talk and grieve us at our graves, then we will be hearing good things and we will have left this world a better place.